Today we're talking about Winlink ICS forms, how to plan events using Winlink ICS forms. I'll talk a little bit about why you should do that. Again, last time we had that, I think some of you know that joke now, right? Winlink is email over radio. For those of you who are new to this, quick plan. We'll give you a quick intro of what we're talking about. We're going to talk about setting goals and objectives, and specifically when you would want to use the ICS 202, then making a plan and knowing what your communications resources are. The ICS 217, we're going to talk about the incident radio plan. We just call it briefly the radio plan, the ICS 205, and that is where most of you will spend most of your time when it comes to ICS, the incident command system. And then, of course, ICS 204 assignments, and I'll point out later why that's a really important part. And if you only do 2 of these, I would recommend making an ICS 205 and ICS 204 for all your events. I think it's a good process to go through overall, but if you only want to do 2, if you want to start small, the 205 and the 204, you should pay particular attention to. All right. Introductions. I'm Oliver, K6OL. I'm the DC for the Aries LX Northeast District. And of course, the forms writer is Greg, KJ6SJT. And he is the brilliant mind behind a lot of the forms, all of the forms actually, that we're going to show you tonight. So stick with us. I think you'll have a good time. The objective in emergency communications is always, as far as I'm concerned, to get the right information at the right time to the right people so they can make the right decisions. Our job as radio operators, as communicators, is to be a circuit when other circuits are broken. Commercial circuits, agency circuits, that's really where we do the most good. The nice thing about amateur radio operators is you don't have to truck us in, you don't have to fly us in, you don't have to drop us out of a helicopter. Most of us live already in the communities that are affected, and we do know the local area pretty well. So we're a resource on both ends, plus we know the other people in our area that we can communicate with and provide some really good on-the-ground information. So let's go through that. Let's talk a little bit about planned and unplanned events and why this matters in your planning. And planned events, when we talk about that, we're talking about exercises, community events, predictable natural events like hurricanes, for me, are the perfect planned event. You see it coming about 2-3 weeks ahead of the time. You very often don't know exactly where it's going to hit, but it's a good idea to start your planning process and have your plans ready in case you're affected, or if you're providing support. I lived in Florida for about 10 years. So I wasn't a ham then, but you could prepare for hurricanes. In most cases, you saw them coming. Sometimes they weren't as bad as you expected. Other times they were a lot worse than you expected. So it's good to be prepared and use your regular planning operations to practice how to plan for planned events, because those are the steps you will take in unplanned events as well. So you want to practice your standard operating procedures. If your operating assumption is that your unplanned events are going to be a totally different ballgame from your planned events, then you probably need to reconsider what it is you're doing. Our standard operating procedure is almost always the same for every exercise we do. We do vary slightly here and there. We add some capabilities, we take some capabilities out, depending on what the situation calls for. But the core should pretty much stay where it is, because that's where you're going to be doing the most good. And solid planned response will help you with unplanned events, because we live in earthquake country here. Unlike a hurricane, earthquake doesn't tell you when it's arriving. Some of you may have heard about the fact that we had a hurricane a couple of weeks back and an earthquake at the same time. So that was fun. My better half and I, we were in the middle of Cajon Pass at the time the earthquake occurred, driving through the rain the hurricane brought. So that was an interesting experience. So you kind of have disasters, you can have natural or man-made disasters. And there's little to no time to respond, so you have to rely on your standard operating procedures, especially in the first couple of hours. We're trying to figure out who's available, where can we move this traffic, and how do we get the right information at the right time to the right people so they can make the right decision. If you practice and plan on a regular basis, that will become much, much easier rather than running around and figuring, what do we do now? On the right there, you see a photo that was taken at Baker to Vegas. And some of you are seeing the background picture. You may notice this is the same road, just in black and white. And that's a law enforcement relay race that goes from Baker in California all the way to Las Vegas. And there are 20 stages there. And you can see here, this is the chute. The runners are going through, passing the baton to the next runner. And then the next runner takes it. And this is about 5-6 mile run to the next station from there. And our group, Aries LAX Northeast, provides communication support for stage 8. And that means we have a mile out station. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. We have a 200-meter station. We have what you see here, which is the runner table, as well as a net control function. And we plan everything the same way using ICS. We'll show you how to do that in a moment. Oops. So why forms? Forms promote consistency in incident management. And consistency is really important because it helps you understand when things are off. Yeah, they facilitate the effective use of mutual aid, especially if you're using the incident command system. You will be working with other groups. If they're using the incident command system, you will actually combine forces much quicker, and there's going to be less friction. It's never going to be frictionless, but you want to minimize the friction when you're operating with other groups. And it's not ill will. The fact of the matter is every group has their own predilections, preferences on how they work. If you're using ICS, that friction is minimized. And it also helps improve the documentation of incidents. If you have a plan before, or if you're making a new plan as the incident unfolds, you can actually document step by step how your event unfolded, especially if you have multiple operational periods. It certainly improves accountability. You can figure out in a year, 2 years from the event, who did what and when and why. The ICS 214 is a great tool. We encourage you to use it. And forms are a great training tool. So please use forms liberally. They'll make your life a lot easier. And we'll show you how easy that can actually be in a moment. The planning P. The planning P is essentially a process that FEMA devised to move from the initial response, which you see here on the leg, right? So the initial response, to a kind of a planned response. If you need more than one operational period, what they do is they start actually going into this. And we're not going to go into too much detail about what each of these parts here are. There's some fantastic resources on the FEMA independent study courses that you can take, as well as ICS 300 and 400, highly recommended. Under the thing about this part is this only happens once, right? So you have an incident, you get notification of the incident, you have an initial response. If you think about a fire truck rolling up, they then brief the agency administrators, there's an incident briefing, and then if they're realizing this is a much bigger incident than we're thinking, or it's a growing incident, then you start having a unified command meeting and you start going into the circle, and you keep going around the circle over and over again until the incident winds down. And in some cases that can last years, not just weeks, right? Because very often recovery starts following this same process. The key things to remember here is you always have an objectives development and update part of it. So the incident commander and unified command establish the incident objectives for the initial operational period. And they keep asking themselves, usually in 12 hours rhythm, are these objectives still valid? Do they need to be adjusted? Then you have a strategy meeting where the incident objectives are shared with the general staff and the command staff and provide direction to them. They have the tactics meeting where they review the proposed tactics and conduct the planning for the resource assignments, right? So who's going to do this now? How are we going to, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it, and who's going to do it, right? And then you have the planning meeting. At that meeting here, the outcome of this meeting is the incident action plan, right? But at this point, all the work should have been done. At this point, you go around the room and you ask, does anybody have any objections to this plan? And you don't expect anybody to say, yeah, I have an objection, because all of that should have been addressed in the other meetings beforehand. Of course, this is a lot of FEMA speak. I'm showing you here a shirt that you can get on Amazon in this case, right? So essentially, this is what it means. Something happens, call for help, get there and see what's happening. Tell everyone what's happening. Get all the muckety mucks together in one pickup. So like, what do we do now? What do you all think we should do? Let's get together and figure this out. The big get her done meeting. Then sharpen your crayons and get ready to write everything down. Cuss, discuss, and nod on color by number picture for how to do this. Then color the picture and autograph it, right? That's signing the IAP. And then tell them workers how to get her done. And then it's time to go do that voodoo that you do so well. And if you guys think that this is kind of crazy, guess what shirt I'm wearing right now for this presentation? I'm living the dream, man. All right. So, and you can see Lou here, AC6LS. He actually got all of our ADCs that did the ICS 300 training, the shirt, so we can go around remembering what this is. Okay, the short version of this is what Elizabeth will recognize, a very German way of doing that. Set a goal, make a plan, get to work, and then repeat, right? So that's the short abbreviated version, and that's what we're following today. Okay, let's start with setting a goal. The ICS 202 sets the incident objectives, the why and the what. And we can talk about SMART objectives, right? But I heard a great, is there anybody from Washington State here? No? All right. I heard a great talk by a Canadian.
I am.
Yeah. Okay, Bill, thank you. You guys have a fantastic training session up there in Washington State. And a couple of years ago, you had a video on Canadian ICS, and the gentleman who spoke at the time said something that really resonated. One, is it a problem? If it is a problem, is it our problem? That's a good question to ask, right? And then if it is our problem, what's the simple solution for us to fix that problem? One of the things you will experience in amateur radio is that people want to go complex. And if you start complicated or complex, you're going to run into issues very, very quickly. So I would encourage everybody to please keep your solutions simple as you humanly can. For us in amateur radio, and we'll talk about that when we look at the ICS 205, know where your people need to go to check in and check out, and know where you're going to send your traffic. Those are the simple solutions. The solution to pretty much every problem that amateur radio encounters is always going to be a net. Because the point for us is we're moving traffic. That's really what we're doing. Some of you may be in amateur radio groups where, you know, you're a volunteer, a badged volunteer, and you may have other duties. But on the radio side of things, your solution will almost always be a net. So don't complicate this too much. So you want to have the incident name, and usually for us, again, amateur radio operators aren't in charge. But if it's just you planning an event for your group, like stage 8, then I encourage you to go through the ICS 202, because it helps you understand how the incident commander or unified command is thinking about the process. So come up with a good incident name. The operational period is always forward-looking. Keep that in mind. You're thinking next 12 hours or sometimes next day, 2-3 days ahead. Set your time to from. Usually those are 12-hour increments, but depending on your exercise, could be more or less. And then start setting your objectives, right? SMART objectives are a great way to start, and I'll leave you to look up FEMA SMART. They have some really nice, colorful pictures. We're not going into detail. We talked about that before. But a couple of objectives that I think are really important, and we always include this: everyone comes home. We don't want to leave anybody behind. We want to make sure that everybody comes home safely. That's job number one. If our own people cannot do this safely, then we're doing something wrong. Second one for us in LAX Northeast is almost always establish a radio network and move mission critical traffic during the operational period. We then get a little bit more detailed by saying provide situational reports in the form of check-ins. Did you feel it? Field situation reports, ICS 213s. Many of you hopefully have filled one out by now. And checkouts when requested by net control, other traffic as needed. We very often announce this. Another objective that is big for us is maintaining an ICS 214 activity log and a communications log for the entire operational period. That has been really, really valuable working with our served agency, our hospitals, and that's what we support, hospitals, because we can actually show them this is the work we've done as volunteers. And by the way, volunteer hours are reimbursable. So your served agency can actually, you don't get any money for that because you're donating your time, but your served agency can actually get that. So an ICS 214 is worth money to them if you turn it in. The operational period command emphasis gives you an additional option. In our case, we usually add Winlink related things in there. Hourly bed availability reports via Winlink are a big deal for our hospitals. So the Medical Alert Center in our case, which is the EOC for the hospitals in LA County, does want to know on an hourly basis during these events and exercises how many beds are available for each of the categories at every facility, because they have to distribute the load of patients on these hospitals, right? We also point out that people should confirm via voice. And then we also put in that a response to the Medical Alert Center polls within 15 minutes of the request is desired. And a response, the MAC very often polls some very specific information that they want from every hospital. And so what happens is they give it to the radio operator then contacts each and every of the hospitals and tells them to get this information. And then we go down the list after 15 minutes and see who has that information, keep doing that until we got the answer to all the polls, right? General situational awareness, if you don't put a safety plan in place, and there is an ICS form for a safety plan, as well as a risk assessment, this is a great place to start adding things like weather. Every plan that you make, every objective plan that you make should have consideration for the weather, because you'd be surprised how many people skip that. And who was it who, we just talked about the weather in Texas, right? It can be quite capricious very, very quickly. And I went to school in Chicago, and one of the things in Chicago is no weather pattern lasts more than 3 days. It just goes back and forth. We had a fall day where we went through 4 seasons in one day. So be sure to make sure all of your people are aware of the weather. Hazards, traffic, especially if you're doing something like Baker to Vegas or you're out in public, traffic is a big one. COVID-19, for those of you who remember, we have and still have to some, we had and we still have to in some areas, a pandemic going on. Dehydration is a big one. Hams get so into the radio bit that they forget to eat and drink. And we've made that a priority for our events, that every hour we have a reminder for every on-the-air reminder for people to hydrate and eat something. And then, of course, being amateur radio operators, electrical and radio frequency hazards are a big deal. And then we offer mitigations, wear safety vests, practice social distancing, hydrate at least once an hour, there you go, and practice electrical and RF safety protocols. Take 15-minute breaks at least every 2 hours. That's the other thing. Hams like to go 5-6 hours. I remember coming down from 200 meters to check on our people at stage 8. And one of our operators had been going 6 hours nonstop, and I just pulled her off the line. I said, "You're taking half-hour break. We're not letting you back anywhere near this." And she definitely needed that to recover and whatnot. It's really important to do that. If a safety plan is required, in this case, we said no. If you say yes, fill out the ICS. I think it's a 209. Don't quote me on that. I can show you later where it is in the list. And make sure that it's centrally located. And then, of course, if you're doing a full-blown incident action plan, make sure that you tell people what to expect as you're doing this. A map always helps. We can talk about how to send that via amateur radio. And so we covered the IAP attachments. Any questions about this? And by the way, this isn't secret knowledge. I was in a discussion with a group that wanted to keep all the incident information secret because only leadership should know. And I said, you need to tell people what they're supposed to do, why they're doing this. That's the most important part. And essentially, your ICS 202 is the why and the what. And please communicate to your people when you're filling this out, and think about that beforehand. You want to make sure that they have clear and achievable objectives that they can meet. Quick point here about weather. Some of you may know you can actually request weather updates through Winlink. It's actually pretty easy. You can go into the catalog and get it through there, or if you know, in this case, KLOX is the Oxnard National Weather Service office, which is responsible for most of Southern California. So you can actually go and request these data points, these text files, and you can get these really nice write-ups. And it makes life a lot easier, especially if you're in a remote destination where you may not have access to that, right? And if you want to, you can do that. All right, make a plan. ICS 217 communications worksheet. That's kind of where you should start on a regular basis. And I would say go over this at least once every quarter, once every half year, and ask yourself what's available. And that should be a list of all the things that are available to your group. Your repeaters, your simplex frequencies. If you're using FRS, that should be in there. If you're using GMRS, that should be in there. If you're using commercial information, that should be in there. If you're using mesh, I would put that in there. This should be a whole spreadsheet, right? The nice thing is you can actually take parts of this, and again, whether it's called CERT or Hamlet, this is the town of Hamlet. I came up with that. The numbers here are completely made up, right? In this particular example, so any similarities with real or deceased people are completely coincidental, as they say, right? And just have that available. And especially if you are separated from your group, tell them what the resources are that are available. And that's the overall picture of what you have for your group. I do want to point out a couple of these forms and everything that has to do with this. You can actually export all the information here as a comma-separated value file, a data file. It's a small file. If you click on yes, and then you click on submit, it'll attach that file, and it makes it super easy for the other side to add that to their spreadsheet if they're using a spreadsheet, right? So if you have agency radios and their permission to add that information, by all means, add that information, because you may have to mix and match. It may not all be amateur radio. It may be a mix of that. And you do want to make sure that you have that. You do want to have the VCall, right? The VHF calling frequency in there, and the UCall, the UHF calling frequency, as well as some of your favorite frequencies. HF should be in there, right? Any questions about that? Pretty straightforward, huh? All right. Let me show you an example of professional ICS 205 radio communications plan, because what you have in the 217 then feeds into your 205 radio communications plan. And this is an example from the NIFOG. You can download that at this address down here. That's the Field Operation Guides, the National Incident Field Operations Guide, National Interoperability Field Operations Guide. And looks like this in the printed version, right? Kind of thick. But actually, I think it makes more sense. You can also get it as an app on your phone, both on iPhone and Android. I highly recommend that you download that, because there's some really, really great information on there on how to run this and watch out situations. So at least read the first 20, 30 pages. I think you'll be better for it. And this is an example on page 26 on what a incident radio communications plan looks like. And you can see here the function, tactical, and command. So you've got command, tactical support, staging, air to ground. You're not limited to these. You can add more. You can have logistics function or logistics net if you need a parking net, or you can add that. That's completely up to you. Incident command system is very flexible. It's not dogma. It's a system that is supposed to help you get the job done. Of course, words like command, tactical support mean something to fire departments and police departments and utility companies. They're not super useful in the amateur radio world because our traffic flows differently. We're not channelized in most of our frequencies, I think, except for 60 meters. And so use the terms that make sense for you. Net control, where will people find net control? And that's usually your resource net as well. So people check into net control. If it's a small net, they might send traffic on there. If it's a tactical net, that might work pretty well. But if it's a logistics net that you're running, you probably want to have a traffic frequency on there. You can have a tactical frequency on there. You can define Winlink frequencies on there. Just feel free to make this work for how your group operates. Just explain to outsiders what it is you're doing. That's really, really important. Are we doing on time? Oh, we're good. All right. And in this case, they're doing to 4 digits. In the older versions, they did it to 5 digits. Make sure that this works as it works for you. You can see a lot of the interoperability channels here as well. This is how you put in trunking systems. You can put the talk group in there. So again, this is a very flexible system. This is what an incident radio communications plan looks like on, let's say, an upcoming event that we have, Red Skies. And the good news about this is I didn't put this together. This was actually one of our ADCs, the Assistance District Emergency Coordinators. But because we've done this so often, they have a really good grasp on what it is we need to do. In our case, we don't call it command, we call it coordination. That's where we expect everybody to listen in. You can see here on the 446 and 441, this is a repeater. We're using wide, which is mostly for amateur radio. And then this is tone squelch, right, with a receive tone and a transmit tone. And this will be analog. Again, this is a repeater system with linked repeaters on the DARN system. So we point that out, meaning if you have access to other DARN repeaters in our area, use that as long as they're linked. We generally give people a single repeater that we expect them. If the links go down, they know where to find us. That's a really, really big deal because in linked systems, sometimes links get broken and then you don't hear anything. Another good term, and I learned that in my COML class, is to use, you can use backup here, but then you can also use the term future. Because future means if your incident is expanding, you have those frequencies already, people know to expect you on those frequencies. That makes life a lot easier. This is a simplex frequency. You can see that 144, 144. CSQ means carrier squelch, so no tone. Think about it that way. In our case, they're always mixed because in our reading, and we can argue about whether Winlink is digital or not, in our thinking, Winlink is digital traffic, although the signal itself is analog, right? But the point there is we're sending digital traffic through that, i.e. text messages. And so what we have here are future 1, future 2. And if this goes down, then everybody needs to expect that we're going to go to the simplex frequency right away. We also define data traffic, right? You can have voice traffic, data traffic. In our case, because we have very complex traffic in terms of our resource requests specifically, where we have medical lists, medical medications. Are there any doctors or medical personnel here? Raise your hand. No?
Yes.
All right. Scott. Oh, well, obviously, Scott. Scott, give us the name of a medication that just pops into your mind that has a longer name.
Wellbutrin.
There you go. How would you spell that?
And that's why I've got a cheat sheet on my clipboard on how to spell these on my PCRs.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Scott. So Scott is absolutely pointing this out. And here's the thing. I'm not medical personnel. Scott is. He understands this, but I would have to spell all of this out to make sure that it's done correctly. And so we do everything with Winlink because it makes our life a lot easier. And in this case, we define which frequency they should be on. We give them the frequency. We tell them it's carrier squelch. And we also tell them which gateways they should be using. Very often in our case, we also have data traffic for out of area. So if it's a forwarding gateway, an HF gateway that has forwarding installed, you can actually also add that in there and tell them do local traffic on this gateway if the internet's gone, and do out of area traffic on that gateway. That information should go into your ICS 205, and everybody should get an ICS 205. It's really important that your users, your operators find you when they're lost. And then because this exercise has a regional component, we actually put these HF frequencies in there, but this is listen only because only the coordinator for the group should be talking on that net, because it's also a coordination net. And for the regional part, we actually did a separate ICS 205. And this is where Jeff and Tom took the information from. What we're doing here is with the L and the U, we're telling them lower sideband, upper sideband, because that makes just sense in amateur radio. But also see here in the special instructions, we define all the terms we're using. CSQ, carrier squelch, TSQL, tone squelch, transmit, receive, narrow, wide, single sideband, lower sideband, upper sideband, analog, digital mixed. So you want to make sure people have that information, and you want to repeat that information over and over again. The other cool thing you can do with that, and we'll show you that in the practical part, is you can also export all this information as a CSV data message. And so, again, it makes it very easy for the other side to take that into a spreadsheet and manipulate it quickly. Any questions about that?
Yeah, what position is a CUL, Charlie Uniform Lima?
Communications unit leader.
No longer COML?
That's the term for that they use on the ICS, communications unit leader.
Really?
Yep. It's actually in the ICS 205 if you look in the explanation on the PDF. And yeah, but you're bringing up something else here, Dan. Here you can export the CSV, but also you can paste the channel data from a spreadsheet. And these things print out really, really well. Scott, go ahead. You're still on mute, Scott. Scott?
Yeah,
There you go.
it might be worth mentioning on the Incident Radio Communications Plan under special instructions. I do this on all of mine. Do not transmit any medical information, HII, or protected information. I literally write that on there. So whoever reads the comm plan sees that and goes, oh, I shouldn't transmit that information. And then I also put on there, if there's a radio tech, for radio issues, please contact them on this frequency or this phone number. Excellent.
And those are great points, Scott. And that also shows you, and Scott has done many of these, that also shows you, you have the special instructions, use them. Use them for what your mission is and make sure that people understand that's exactly what it is. And again, Scott makes this work for because everybody looks at these frequencies. So this is a great place to add that information. Thank you, Scott.
And the last piece is, this is a document that the media can get a hold of. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you may want to have an in-house document that has your tones on it, and then a document that goes out to, say, the press.
That's another excellent point. And again, Scott does this professionally, so be mindful of that. You also don't want to interact with the media at all as an amateur if you can help it, because let the PIOs, the public information officers of your served agency, deal with that. They're trained to do that. So Scott's raising an excellent point there. We should focus on what our task at hand is and let the professionals do their work. So we want to help by being a solution, not by bringing more problems, if that makes sense. So thank you, Scott. Excellent points. I want to show you this because there are a couple of, this was sent to me as part of an exercise, and take a short look on this. Take a short look up and see whether you can spot something of the issues here. All right, anybody?
Well, except for the frequency, everything else is the same.
Right? Just one function. We just showed you the professional one, right? And there's a command channel, or there were 2 command channels, and you have a bunch of tactical channels that are assigned to different functions, whether it was search and rescue, fire, police, etc. There's only one function here, it's net control. So where's the traffic happening here? Where's the tactical communication supposed to happen? So what, you're just talking with net control? How does this work? Right? So that was one issue. Anybody notice that? What's up with the 6 megahertz shifts? And this is not even 6 megahertz, but there's 6 megahertz shift here. And there's a repeater, there's a 6 megahertz shift, and there's another 6. What's up with that? Right? So read these carefully when you get them. And here's the thing, this group here, these are linked repeaters. So they're all, if you key one of them, you're keying all of them. So you've got one function and essentially one frequency, right? If you have a linked system, how many frequencies do you actually have? Anybody say more than one? No. It's one, because you key one of them, you're keying them all, no matter how many frequencies you have, right? And then here's the last one, net control simplex backup, simplex with a 5 megahertz shift. Now, here's the thing, please, when you do this, it may sound silly coming, but when you do these things, please think them through. What would your reaction have been to receiving this as part of an exercise that was supposed to have multiple groups involved?
Oh, it was signed by a COML.
Right.
He just blatantly signed it, didn't read it.
Yeah.
Somebody who wasn't, somebody who actually wasn't familiar with amateur radio practice, it sounds like.
Or
Actually,
ICS practices.
Yeah.
it's a very experienced Tam, I can tell you that. The point I'm trying to make here is, if you see something like this, as Kenny Rogers said, know when to fold them and know when to run, right? That's what we did. I know the gentleman who put this together, I pointed out that this wasn't going to work. And, anyways, the point there is, I withdrew our group from the exercise after this, and no improvements. So anybody want to take a guess? Because we listened in for the first hour in the exercise. Anybody want to take a guess how the exercise went?
Was the after action report a teachable moment?
No.
Oh,
It was a disaster from the word go. And it was a self-made disaster. And so what I want to point out with this is, please take the time. You owe it to your participants, you owe it to the other groups you're working with, to spend time to understand how to do that. Again, if we go back to this is what Tom and Jeff put together, they really started thinking about, and Dan, you will recognize the red skies part here. They recognize, okay, everybody needs to have a place where they can check in, check out, and go if they have a problem. Then there must be some backup and this is where the traffic needs to happen. So there's a lot of flexibility into that. And this isn't written in stone, right? You can change this. It's the beauty of forms. So let's talk a little about ICS 204 assignments. You've put your resources together, right? The good version here. And again, here, search and rescue, division A, division B, medical, fire, law enforcement, command, staff, right? So you put your ICS 205 together, you're distributing this. It might be a good idea to get in the habit of put the ICS 204 together as well, and teach people about how to read this. In a perfect world, whoever you send out there only should need the ICS 204 to do the job. In this case, this is from a, let's see, from the SRF Lightning Complex. It was up in your neck of the woods, Dan, right? And this is a great example of what a professional assignment list looks like. They provide the tactical objectives to be achieved in that operational period. They note any safety problems, right? And they take the frequency information right here straight from the ICS 205. So what you're seeing here is kind of a more in-depth look at your ICS 202 information with additional particular information for what they're supposed to do and where they're supposed to be on which frequency, right? VFire, TAC, CalCord, and who's going to be there? Command is going to be on that. Tactical is going to be here, right? Medical is going to be here. The Air Guard is going to be there. That's a big deal. And when you talk to any of these people here, they will have their ICS 204 in reach. It's really important to actually have that in reach and be able to take a look at it. Are we doing what we're doing? And you can do that too. In Winlink, you've got the ICS 204 assignment list. Here's an example. And this is what it looks like for an amateur radio group, right? Not a fire group like here, but an amateur radio group. So this tells you the what, where, who, and how. And the things to tell your operators where to find net control, which Winlink gateways to use if you're using that, or if you're doing voice traffic, where should they send their voice traffic? What tacticals they're supposed to use. In our case, you know, there are hospitals that have tactical calls. Usually this is whoever is assigned to the hospital, and we try to team everybody up in groups of at least 2, very often more, and then we use the tactical identifier here. The reporting location, we very often use what 3 words for this. I deleted them from here, but that's the information that should go in there. By the way, anybody know the difference between division and group other than Scott? Come on. Division is geographic, right? Group is usually by function. All right. So just keep that in mind. And then the work assignments, again, give people achievable goals. You can push them, but give them achievable goals and be clear about what you want them to do. In this case, we put everybody on one ICS 204 because we didn't have specific instructions for each of these. But net control, set up and maintain the resource net on LAX 103, manage the traffic and assign the Winlink gateways. Make sure everybody knows where to go. MAC, which is our Medical Alert Center station, receive and confirm traffic, relay MAC traffic to hospitals. Every time our agency requests something, relay that to the hospitals. And for the hospitals, send hourly, these are bed availability reports, they're called HSAs in our case, provide APRS service levels, respond to net and net control requests, and document everything on ICS 214 with screenshots, etc. Special instructions, gateways will have internet access for this exercise they did. Sometimes we turn it off. Net control will inform stations when sending digital traffic. And, you know, Scott would add additional special instructions in there, right? Do not send any HIPAA-related information or personally identifiable information. And then here you got the name, net control, MAC hospitals. That's how we do it. Again, you have quite a lot of leeway in doing that. It needs to make sense in your world. But if you do it with other groups, make sure you all agree on a language there. And then a function. In our case, it would be resource net rather than command and that stuff. So resource net and traffic management, hospital to MAC traffic. So these are the traffic nets. And then we got voice relays, right? Does that make sense? All right. And I hope you find this very, very logical. And I want to show you this in a moment in live, what you can do here. We're still doing pretty well on time. Quick look ahead. Jim Price is going to talk on October 5th about the Cal OES Cal Link system. So that's going to be a whole lot of fun. And on October 19th, there's a great shakeout. And we'd like to invite all of you to participate and your groups to participate, because this is a great way of actually planning your own operations locally using the ICS forms, but also sending did you feel it reports. And these maps are from last year. And actually quite a few check-ins from Dallas, Houston, Texas. We had a couple from the Northeast there and in that area. So the West Coast is traditionally very involved in this because we sit on on earthquake faults, right? So you can scan this little dinosaur here and I'll bring you up on the Winlink ShakeOut website with a lot more information, including a Winlink exercise that everybody can do. All right, so let me show you a couple of things and let's open it up for questions. Anybody have any questions?
Could you put that QR code back up?
Oh yeah, sure. Easy. It's not sure. It makes it easier if it's a little larger. All right. By the way, if you go to Google or DuckDuckGo and you type in Winlink ShakeOut, it'll be the first hit. All right. So I got two hands up. Let's go with Gene first and then David. So
yes, hopefully everybody's doing well tonight. Great presentation so far, and I'm writing down the information that you've been putting out. One question I have is we have, as right now, 65 participants. I think it went up to about 70 or so early, but here we go. A number of us, probably directly or indirectly, working with or for a served agency. We might be volunteers, we might be paid, whatever. But so far to date, how many of those organizations that you are associated with have at least one planning session for the big eclipse next year? I mean, yeah, we got several months to go, but are your organizations planning on waiting to the month before? Are they proactively doing something now, at least in the early stages? That's just what I'd like to know.
For specifically the eclipse or any event?
Yeah, well, the eclipse, the leading up to the eclipse, during the eclipse, and shortly after the eclipse. Those will be the high traffic times, the among other things, traffic jams, perhaps, how's medical going to, EMTs going to get throughout the cities or your cities when the roads are blocked because people just decide to park on the side of the road?
I don't know whether they have any specific plans for an eclipse in LA County or the city of LA, but knowing how they're planning, how the Office of Emergency Management does planning here, they usually look years ahead. So I wouldn't be surprised if they already have plans for that they're going to revise the closer the event gets. One of the largest events that they have in Los Angeles every year are the Academy Awards. And they have a full-blown IAP every single time. And if you get a chance to see that, if you can find it on the internet, they have the IAPs available, and it's fascinating reading. Absolutely fascinating reading. So in the professional world, especially here in Southern California, they have planning departments that do this over and over again, and most of the agencies here are pretty used to working with each other under ICS. So
right, I can understand that, but there's some things that happen every year, happen every month. This is, for like a lot of us, going to be a once in a lifetime event here in Killeen, Texas. It's going to be, this stretch of Texas is going to be bumper to bumper traffic, and in places that you should not be parking and going speeds. And I mean, there are a lot of factors involved with the planning, whether it be from portalets, places that you normally can't park at, but now you are allowed to temporarily, food vendors. I mean, it's a spiraling type of planning process. I'm just wondering if anybody else on the Zoom call tonight, if the organizations that you are part of, either voluntarily or professionally, have they addressed these issues yet? Especially if you're in like this belt from like Texas, I think, to Missouri and upward all the way up to Canada. I'm just wondering if any of y'all organizations are doing anything yet.
Well, here's the thing, because we have a lot of questions to get through. So what I would suggest is, if you have plans for the eclipse, or if you're familiar, if you know about any of the plans, or if you have served agencies, I would suggest put it in the chat, and that way we'll actually have a whole list, and it'll make it easier for people to download and kind of get that idea. Does that sound like a plan? And then we'll go.
That'll be very helpful. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And David, you're up next.
Hi, Oliver. Thanks very much. I'm a recovering bureaucrat, and I'm very, very sensitive to forms and compiling information, drafting it, assembling it, reviewing it, and distributing it. How do you physically do that unless it's just one person doing it?
Well, the two approaches we're taking, I'm glad you're asking, David. The distribution here is via Winlink. For our group in particular, we use spreadsheets for this. And let me just give you an example here. This is our ICS 205. We actually have in our IAPs, and maybe I can show you one later for a previous exercise. But we actually do spreadsheets because they're very flexible. And in this case, you can actually link them to. So in this case, let's say if my coordination channel, if I want to switch this to CERT 22, I can change that, and you see it actually changes the information here to the right as well. I can go back to, what was it, CERT 16, and that's my repeater here. So we actually do most of our planning on spreadsheets, and we found that with VARA FM in particular, sending even larger spreadsheets isn't as much of a problem anymore as it used to be.
Are you co-located? Are you co-located at all, or how much collaboration are you able to accomplish, particularly on a short time frame?
With our agency, or with whom?
Well, with your own group. Yeah, we've got 4 or 5 pretty comprehensive forms that have to be compiled either from scratch or at least from some kind of a prior exercise. And I'm just kind of curious of the bureaucratic organization of putting these together so that you get it done efficiently and with quality.
Well, when I started this and started taking a lot of the training, it took me a couple of days to do this. Now we can do this in under an hour. The beauty of having this, doing this over and over and over again with every single exercise is, one, you get better at it, but two, you can go to the last exercise and just change what you need to change for what your issue is, or you can go to the last planned event and change what you need to change for this time. Our Baker to Vegas, to give you that example, incident action plan changes very little from year to year because we also get the same frequency. So we may make adjustments on our side on what we want to try, but now it's evolutionary. It's not revolution. We don't have to start from scratch. And I'm really glad you bring that up, David. That's why I'm a big fan of doing planned events over and over again, because it does give you both the experience, but it also gives you ready-made plans that you can apply. So, for example, our medical resource and surge exercise, which is coming up in November, we already have the plan from last year. We're going to adjust it to what the needs are this year, being sensitive to a lot of the data because of the pediatric surge this year, being more sensitive towards what is required there. But generally speaking, because we're a radio group, our operations don't change that much from event to event. Our frequencies may change, but the operations themselves don't really change all that much. That's the beauty of it. Does that answer it?
Yes, thank you very much. Basically, practice.
That's the best advice. The more often you do this, the better everybody, and not just you, Dave, but everybody will get at this. And that was my experience. In the beginning, as I said, it took me a couple of days to just agonize over this. Now it's a question of, okay, where do people need to go to check in and check out? And what do they need to monitor to know what's going on? And that's your coordination or command, but that's your coordination channel. Where do they need to send traffic? And do we need to make allowances for additional traffic channels? Out of curiosity, before we move on, for those of you who've got some experience moving traffic, how many stations do you think you can take traffic on a single frequency? I'm not talking about a contest. I'm talking about actual resource requests, actual ICS 213s with multiple lines, complex information.
Question. Is there just one frequency?
No, that's my question. How many
Oh.
frequencies do you need?
Well, you need one for the tactical information sharing. Then you need others, depending on the size of the event. You need other frequencies to actually pass traffic off the tactical or command frequency.
Yeah, and that's exactly our experience is if we're doing Winlink, a good experienced net control, traffic net control can do between with really experienced operators on the other side can do between 8 and 12 stations max. And that means everybody on that net has experience and knows what they're doing. If you have people that aren't experienced and are bungling around, they're not really tuning their VARA, then it's probably closer to 6. And if you're doing it on voice with the type of traffic we have, then you're looking at 3 to 4, because then you need the readbacks. You need to so be aware. In our district alone, we've got 25 hospitals. That means I need to plan for at least 3 traffic frequencies and 3 net controls. Practice that, and that's where the future frequencies come in really, really handy, knowing that you can move people. Okay, these stations are now part of a new net on LAX 507 and move people around. All right, don't want to monopolize it. Huh?
I can't.
We had, I think, Dennis, Jim, Scott, and Bill. Let's go in that order. Dennis?
For a second, if I can.
Oh, sorry, Dan, is that you?
Yes, it is me. Hi there, folks.
Sorry, go ahead. I can't see that because you're not popping up on my screen here.
I don't know what the story is. I like to remind people, if you have a camera when you come on the talk, please turn your camera on. There's been several that has not done that, and it really helps everybody if you would. Pete, back to the show.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I think it was Dennis, right? Go ahead.
Good evening, Oliver. Nice to see you. You mentioned ShakeOut, and I was going to add that we're planning on having a session on RATPAC the Thursday before ShakeOut, which will be all about ShakeOut, and that'll be the 12th of October, Thursday. So you guys definitely want to tune in for that, and we'll be going through the whole story on ShakeOut and how everybody can be involved in that, and how to use the digifeelits and all the good forms that go with that too, Oliver. So since you had a chart on ShakeOut, I figured I'd toss that in there.
Excellent.
So that's what we got scheduled for the 12th. And great job tonight. Thanks for what you do, Oliver. Always appreciate it.
Thank you, Dennis, and we're looking forward to the Red Skies exercise. Yeah. It's going to be a blast, and Dennis is going to be our regional coordinator. And last year he did a fantastic job. And again, you can tell experienced net controls, especially when you're moving frequencies. So one of the things Dennis did that I actually went over with our team again and again was every time we moved frequencies, he did a roll call, make sure that everybody came across. Do not lose people. That is so important, because I've seen nets in our area that we call check-in and how do I say that nicely? Check-in and buzz off. How about that? So they take the check-ins and then they don't care anymore, right? So just understand, as far as I'm concerned, once you're net control, you're responsible for people checking in and checking out. In California, by the way, on the professional side, and Scott will tell you that, it's door to door. They're responsible in the incident from the moment you leave your house to the moment you return to your house, and you usually check in. So, all right, let's go with Jim, Bill, Scott, and Carolyn. Jim, go ahead. Jim, you're muted.
Okay, any better now, Oliver?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. Just a couple of things. Yeah, Humboldt County is planning a big ShakeOut event, and they've talked to us about it. One of the problems we have, in all honesty, is we only have a couple of people. And so we can't, it's going to be difficult to handle voice traffic. So we are encouraging people to use Winlink for us. It's so much easier because we get the message, we can copy it and forward it to the operations people. The other thing I'd like to mention, and we may all know this, but it's a habit that hams need to break. When we had an earthquake in St. Helena, I was a volunteer with CDF and went over there. They asked me to, and all I'm hearing is ham call signs. And finally I said, I heard a call sign, and I said, so where are you? He said, oh, well, I'm at the Napa Hospital. I said, okay, then your tactical call is Napa Hospital. And then the next guy, well, I'm at EOC in St. Helena. Well, then your tactical call is. So I would really encourage people to practice using tactical calls, and then you sign with your ham call.
Yeah. And that's a great thing that Jim has actually pointed out to us numerous times. And I hope you were very proud of our 204, right? With all the tacticals on the left. But it does make life a lot easier because, especially if you're working with an agency, they don't have a clue who K6OLI is. They know who is at Huntington Hospital. And they understand that Huntington is a hospital because that's what they do. So Jim's point is very, very well taken.
Well, and the other thing is when you come on, you come on in the middle of an event, they say, go in, bring the radio up. A bunch of ham calls don't give you a picture of who's where.
Yeah.
And so even if you have an ad hoc event that just comes out of the blue, really using some sort of tactical call really helps people identify who's where.
Absolutely. And Jim, thank you so much. I think that's great. Bill, let's go with you, then Scott, then Carolyn. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, first of all, I'm kind of in an interesting situation where I'm in a very small county. And basically directions go 2 doors from mom and go left. And you have to understand where that guy's mom lives. So you know where to go. And I found myself in a situation where now getting into Winlink, doing a lot of this stuff, I'm realizing how far behind the 8 ball we are as a county. I'm thinking I'm the first person who's done Winlink. And I think I'm just the first person who's done any of the FEMA ICS courses. And that's not to brag, it's just to say, this is where we're starting from here. And, but we do the Idaho ShakeOut. We're just trying, I think at this point, what we're trying to do is just, or at least what I'm trying to do is learn from you folks and slowly start to implement some of the things you're talking about. Because I think the thing that we're starting to realize is that if we have a real disaster and somebody from Utah comes up or somebody from Nevada or something like that, they're not going to be able to talk to us. And we're going to have to try to figure out a way to keep the small town feel, but then also at the same token, be able to fit into the system in a way that works for everybody.
And Bill, you're putting your finger right on, and this is not a challenge that I think is unique to you, even if the county is smaller. That I think that's a challenge we're all wrestling with. And Dennis will be the first to tell you about the experience they had in Ridgecrest and reaching the EOC after this massive earthquake. So we're with you on this. You're not alone. We all started somewhere. And I hope that this gives you something that you can take back to your group and say, let's try this and make it work for us. Especially if you are relying on resources from the outside, probably have we didn't go into this, but probably have an HF plan in there as well. And, know that you're not alone and work with one another. And if there's anything we can do, please reach out and don't be shy about that. Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. And congratulations on taking the first steps. That's what it's all about, and yeah, excellent. Thank you. And Scott, go ahead.
Just one thing to add, it's like on the ICS 206, the medical plan.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I did with our Aries group, not our Aries group, our amateur club during field day, is I was tasked to create this. Not only did I create, when I created it, I sent it to the fire department that has jurisdiction, who is the authority having jurisdiction. And I said, would you please review this and tell me is this accurate information? And it was interesting. It came back to me going, hey, if don't include this fire station, it's an unmanned station. And you don't want to take anybody there. You want to go to this fire station over there. And so I made the correction, sent it back to them, and they said, yeah, that looks great. Thank you for including us on your plan to see what you guys were doing, but we didn't know you were there.
Absolutely. And Scott is pointing out, this is the form he's talking about. This is the Winlink version of that form he's talking about. It is absolutely essential that you share your plans if you're working with an agency, because they will, one, see that you're prepared. Our officer in charge at Baker to Vegas always says we're the most over-prepared group he's ever worked with. But then again, on the other hand, you do want to make sure that your people know that there is a plan. I mean, who of us wants to go into something completely blind? I don't, especially not if lives are on the line, right? So Scott, your points are absolutely great. And yes, share it. Make sure that people who have the domain knowledge actually can give you feedback and be open to feedback. And I think that's the takeaway from Scott's comments there as well. Be open to feedback. People want it. I took a cert course by LA County many years ago. And there, the first thing they told us was, listen, we're not trying to make you into heroes. What we're trying to do is make sure that you can get yourself out of trouble, because if we don't have to come rescue you, you're one less problem for us to take care of. And there is something to that. So yeah, the more self-sufficient you are. All right, Carolyn. So again, thank you, Scott. Excellent points there.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Where do you find the IAP for the Academy Awards?
You'll have to look that up on online in a search engine, because I know a friend of mine found it that way. I haven't seen, but I can show you a couple of the fire ones if anybody's interested.
Okay.
All right, but it's a big one. It's like this thick, and they've got, the other thing is, if you have more than one group that you're sending out there, the 204, you can have several of these. So just keep that in mind. The other thing I wanted to point out, did we have anything in chat that we need to address? Because there's another thing I want to point out before I let you go here. Now, all of you sent these, or many of you sent these 213s, RATPAC, to use the ICS 205 before. And that's something I want to leave you with tonight. Greg, KJ6SJT, is absolutely brilliant. And so one of the things that we've done is make the ICS 213 mappable. I wasn't a fan of that in the beginning, because I don't think that mapping an ICS 213 is the smartest move. And I'll show you why, because if you send a couple of these, and these are ICS, so let's just filter for the ones I received in the last 2 hours here. All right. So I need to zoom out here. Actually, I need to zoom out all the way so we can see Finn. May not be the smartest thing, because one of the things about Winlink is if you have several ICS 213s, which you will have if they're resource requests, and yes, you can send a resource request in an ICS 213 general message. But if you have several of these, they're usually distinguished by personnel, equipment, et cetera, et cetera. If you send one of two, two of two, or one of three, two of three, three of three, they stack on top, and on the Winlink map, you only ever see the latest one from that location. Does that make sense? All right. But here's the kicker where I think this makes a huge difference. We can generate a CSV file, right? And we can go generate this CSV file. We can, as they're coming in, we can add to this file. And we see the 23 records that you guys send. We can click on exit, can close this, and let me find it on my, and of course I closed my folder. So bear with me for 2 moments, but I think you'll actually see the, let's see the example here. Video. and Winlink. And then see that's the file that we exported it to. And with any luck, it'll open a little bit faster. But I think the CSV is really where the value of this is, and I'll show you in a moment why.
Notice the size of that CSV. It's minuscule compared to the data that went into it.
8 kilobytes. You can actually send this really, really easily. Oops. Of course, it's on this side, right? Click OK. Michael, you have your hand up. Is that right? All right. So here's the thing. Those of you who sent, you should recognize your call sign here, right? This is an exercise. Kudos to everybody who filled that out, right? Check marks, you can see that.
Oops.
Here's the subject, and here's the message. Now imagine you have a ton of these, how easy it is to go through these messages and start sorting and triaging which ones are the important ones and which ones you're going to address. You can still print them out, you can still do this, but this gives you a fantastic overview over what is it they're asking for, right? What is the message that they have? You can highlight because it's in a spreadsheet. You can actually save this as a spreadsheet. You can start highlighting it. You can start making remarks on this. And I think this is the true value, because here's the thing. If you have a resource request, 1 of 3, 2 of 3, they'll actually all show up here in a single spreadsheet. And as Dan is pointing out, with 8 kilobytes for, what is it, 25 messages? And you don't have to wade through tons and tons and tons of single messages. If I do the same thing here and I want to understand, well, what's going on here, I actually have to click on this. And I have to see the message, you know, maybe I need to open maybe I need to open this and take a look where it's coming from, right? Here. This one is from Radio Mail, you can tell because the source isn't in there, right? But here you go. I can open this, I can reply to it, but I would have to do that singly. Here I can do it with one file. How cool is that? And you can get a quick overview. Imagine you show up at an EOC or Central Hub at an IC post and you show them this. That's going to make your life a whole lot easier. And you can add additional information here if you want to by hand, you know, keep saving it and save it as a different file. And the CSV will continue to update as you go. All right. So let me ask you one more time for questions. See, mine blind. I know mine was when we tried that.
Will you put the map up to show what happened tonight?
Sure.
Or do you have coordinates in your 205? I mean, your 213, I'm sorry.
Yeah, in the 213, absolutely. Here are the coordinates. You got latitude, longitude. I know our friends in Texas like to use NGRS, right? And yeah, we can certainly put up the map here. Again, remember, it'll only show the latest. So if you had sent multiples, but we can take a look at Finn's traffic here. And, you know, never used an ICS 213 before. That's a great message, and it gives you a quick overview of what's going on here. And the same here, if we click on L0R, training exercises and incidents. So good deal, right? So you can do that. Again, I don't think the mapping on the 213 is the safe, because it's easy to miss something. I would always look at the CSV, and that comes with experience with our agency, right? Bill, you have your hand up. Bill? He disappeared.
Well, he's unmuted, ready to go.
Yes, for exercises, says Dave, right? So I think it's kind of cool.
Where did you generate the CSV from to start it?
Okay. So all of you sent and this is the same process for all the forms that have latitude and longitude capabilities. And we added that, Greg added that to the ICS 213 recently. So in this case, it's an option here on my dropdown. The ICS 213, just like the Did You Feel It map or the Winlink check-in we did last week, right? And the checkout. I go to ICS 213, I click on Generate CSV file, the comma separated values file. I use the comma as a delimiter. You could use tab, but I use the comma as a delimiter. I like to have year, month, date, but it's completely up to you. Emergency communications is usually local time, but if you prefer UTC, you can check that. I limited the start date and time because I had previous entries there to tonight, and I started at 4 o'clock. This is only if you use filters, right? Include only reports corresponding to markers shown on map. I generally don't use that, but some people like using that. And then you can check this, and that generates a new CSV file when the reports are received. So you don't actually have to export it every single time, but every new ICS 213 that you receive will automatically be added to the CSV file. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What's scary is Winlink is smarter than I am about where to put those.
I would say have a good folder that you remember, and then you click on browse and give it a name. It usually, by default, it names everything Winlink messages. That's not super helpful. And again, because you need to have a default, what I recommend is start with a year, month, day. That's the ISO way of doing it. I usually like to put in a time of when the event started, telling me this is for 213s and this is the name of the event in this case. Or you could do the name of the event first and then the 213, depends on how you like organizing it. But in this case, it made it because the 213 was the core of what I wanted to show you, and then add the .csv if it's not already in there. I'm just being on the safe side. Does that make sense? Bill,
Okay.
does that answer your question? All right. So, Dan, shall we take one last comment from Jim and then wrap it up?
Please do. Don't leave anybody out.
Hey, Oliver, that drop down that you showed at the beginning, how did you build that?
Which drop down?
The different maps, that one there.
That one. Oh, here's the thing. This is all of you have that in your, let's go step by step. All of you have that in your Winlink Express. I'll make this larger so it's easier to see. On the top where you've got the form map and CSV file button, the little globe, you click on that. And then the select form. I obviously have a lot more than most other people, but every form that has the option to put latitude and longitude in there will allow you to map it. And there are tons of forms that do this.
Okay, got it.
You also might want to mention that they can also generate a KML file for Google, depending upon if you're going to a big ArcGIS external graphics program. Some of them take CSV, some of them take KML, and both of them are available.
Yeah, I've never found the KML file to be super useful because every GIS system does accept CSVs, and they're a lot easier to import, even on Google Earth, and the tags don't look as funny. So yeah, it's just, you can use KML if you want to, but I would always urge you to use the CSV. I think that's a lot easier to import.
Oliver, in places where there are fires and the internet works until the fire gets there, using KMLs, you can post on Facebook the IR outline of the fire, that kind of thing.
But what, yeah, well, since you brought it up, let's just go through this real quick.
Duck, duck, go. Okay.
Let's go with a scratch here. That's my scratch map when I do demos, right? So this is Google Maps, works the same on Google Earth, works the same on ArcGIS, it works the same on QGIS that our friend showed. So last week, we want to add a layer here, import the layer. And I just want to show you how easy this is. And you can take this CSV that we just generated with your information, insert the information. We've got the latitude, longitude that we've gotten. You can click on continue. I can say I want the from or the subject, right? If you say help in the subject, that might be a good thing to look for. But let's just say from. Click on finish. All right. And there's the information you guys just provided. And I can click on this and guess what? I get the same information on here. I've used ICS 205 with local Houston events, right? So that makes it super easy. If I do the same thing with a KML, it'll look a little funny. But here's the thing, and this is something that Dan pointed out. If you now want to export that as a good-looking KML, you can export to KML, KMZ right here. You can embed this map on a site, especially if internet, right? All right, so 2 more questions and then we'll wrap it up. Bill and then Scott.
Okay, sorry, I forgot I disconnected my camera for a demo last night. And regarding the 205, the one thing you got to remember is the transmit and receive frequencies. You want to write those down as viewed by the user in the field, not as a repeater owner, and get them backwards.
Yeah, that's a good point. We can point this out here real quick. Let's see, let's just go that just so people have a visual. And again, there's a lot of training available on this. And for those of you outside of SoCal, this may look a little bit weird because people tell me that we have it the other way around for most of the country, but the transmit frequency for us is always the lower frequency, and then the receive frequency is usually the higher frequency for us. So 446, whatever that is, and 441 would be our transmit, 446 would be. And there's a reason for you to make that shift. It's actually easier to see, and it'll take a little while to get used to, but I think that was an excellent suggestion there, Bill. And again, there's a lot of good training out there, and we encourage you to do that. So Scott, go ahead. Last comment for the night.
Yeah, thank you. On the select form dropdown for maps, I believe it was, you had 213 or other forms. Is there a way to combine that together to get all of the received messages, to combine everything into a map in case everything is not on a 213?
Okay, let me try to understand the question. Let me go back to this. And so you're saying this drop down menu, right?
Right. If I
you
want
do a
to
control click or a shift click, so you can do multiple selections.
Oh yeah, no, that you can't do that. No.
Just
So you
select
would have
messages.
to export each of these separately and then combine them manually. Or
One of the options is messages. Can't you just select that?
you can select messages, but here's the downside of that. We can display the map actually, and let's just set the filters for the last 2 hours. So we're only showing the 213, and I'll show you what the downside of that is, right? Associated form, if we're saying we only want to see the 213s, again, we'll scroll out here. It just tells you this is a 213 you received from that person. It doesn't give you the additional information.
Don't filter on the form.
Right, but I can filter on, I can undo the filter completely, right? And just ignore that. And well, I need to go farther back then because we've only done 213s in the last 2 hours. So do not limit by age or date. And so it shows all the messages I received, right? In this case, 1.4 hours. Let's see. Going to this area here. So in this case, it was an ICS 213. Just my luck. I only see the ICS 213s right now.
No, the reason I asked is because I collect all the digital check-ins for our group, and most do 213. Some do a Winlink check-in, some do nothing at all. And that's why I'm trying to consolidate that all together and use that for that map function.
Yeah, I would suggest to tell them to do, if it's a check-in, to just send a check-in and not do a 213. Because again, the mapping on the 213 for us was just something that we wanted to do for the CSV because it makes life a lot easier if you're a served agency. And again, the messages, it only tells you what the message is. It doesn't tell you anything about the content. There's probably more information here on the check-in, but you don't see that. You only see that this was a check-in. So any of the additional information that may be in that message is lost. Here's a weather report, right? Or just had a weather report there. It doesn't tell you anything about the weather. It just tells you got a message from that person and what kind of a message it is. There you go. Right, there's a weather report, local weather, Mulholland Drive. That's all it tells me. It doesn't tell me any of the details of the weather. For that, I would have to go back into this drop-down menu. But because you do have that option to generate the CSV file when reports are received, you can just keep that going in the back, and every now and again, check this. Every now and again, just combine them. Does that make sense? And especially if you're using a mapping app like ArcGIS, QGIS, that makes it really, really easy. The nice thing about using the professional rather than Google Maps, for example, is that ArcGIS and QGIS can monitor CSV. So you can have multiple updating layers at the same time. And I think our friend John last week demonstrated that very impressively how they use that. Okay. All right. Thank you, Scott. Good question. My goal today was to encourage you to use a ICS compatible planning process. Don't sweat it if you're not the incident commander. You're trying to have an orderly approach to your own group. Don't be scared of ICS forms. Everybody's trying to have the same, solve the same problems. And any COM-L that you come across, if you can give them an ICS 205 and say, this is the one for our group, maybe you can make, maybe you can tell us what you want us to do. And then you adjust it, you will have a very, very different reception because you've just helped them solve their problem. All right. And I hope that's really what I want to encourage you to do. All right, I did go over quite a bit, Dan. I'm so sorry.
No, what a good presentations like this, and we still got a great crowd here. We started out with, we lost maybe 15 people since the start. That says a lot. We have quite a turnout, and the information was great. Appreciate that. I also want to hand out my appreciation, if you will, for those that turn the cameras on. It makes a world of difference. There's others that just don't do it. They don't want to do it, or they can't do it, or whatever. But for those that turn the screen on when they're speaking, I really appreciate that. That helps a lot of people. Back to you, Oliver.
Well, in that case, thank you so much, Dan, for having us again. Do want to say a special thank you to Greg, KJ6SJT. Greg's just brilliant. And it takes a lot of work and dedication to make these forms happen and make them as useful as he's making them. I speak from experience. It's so much easier working with forms these days than it used to be. And it makes a better impression on the people you work with when you have a plan and you can show them that you're willing to work with them and help them solve their problem. That's why I'm a ham. I want to help LA County EMS agency solve their communications issues if they have them. I hope I never have to use any of what I showed you for a real event where we have a civilization-ending earthquake, you know. But if we do, you can send a Did You Feel It report, and we encourage you to do that at ShakeOut. And Dennis is going to talk a lot more about that the week before ShakeOut, so join Dennis and the RATPAC for that. And I do want to say thank you so much for the excellent questions, for the conversation. Really appreciate your patience and your engagement. And I do want to say thank you so much. And 7-3's all, and I'll talk with you soon. Reach out if you have questions. All right.